You cannot do this.
Nay, nay, soon all shall be burned. The West has failed. It shall go up in a great fire, and all shall be ended. Ash, ash and smoke blown away on the wind.
All shall not be ended.
Pride and despair. Pride and despair.
It appears somewhat common in right-wing circles in the general anti-progressive sphere to indulge in a lot of black pilling, especially now with the capitulation of a sizable enough chunk of the GOP to make the difference, and the lack of either will or ability for the Trump administration to close the deal. What's entirely clear now for those with eyes to see is that the system is not what was taught to us in civics class. The current regime and support for it is an astroturfed cabal of insiders, and neither you, I, nor our concerns have a seat at the table. We're not citizens with a voice, we're the ruled plebs of an increasingly authoritarian regime, reveling in its power and entirely unconcerned with how the optics will be perceived by the other side. In such an environment, there's any number of takes out there that the West is finished, America is doomed, and we might as well be ready to accept the pod, the bugs, and the global homo agenda from now till the end of days. I say this partially tongue-in-cheek, but there is a lot of demoralization and naysayers out there who are prepared to sneer at any kind of existing current opposition because they know what's really going on. And the choices are accelerationism or bust. And honestly, there is plenty reason to be upset. What with the protests at Capitol Hill, the general gutlessness of the GOP, the tyrannical lockdowns, the outcome of the most perfect and secure election in American history, the power and coordination of the corporate press, and so on and on. All bad news. However, in times like this, I think it's good to remind both you and myself to take heart. In a certain sense, the best way to deal with mundane, low politics is to transcend them through hope, faith, and strength of spirit. There's perhaps no better example in history of this than the fact that Jesus Christ only needed 12 apostles to totally change the world. 12 men of no significant background or prestige changed the course of history forever and began to spread the gospel across the known world, ultimately Christianizing the vast empire that persecuted them within the span of a few centuries. And it all started with Christ and his 12. And whether you're a Christian or not, I think this is a lesson that one can take heart from. I heard an Orthodox priest giving a talk once about the history of the church, and I believe he said it was during the 3rd century that Greek merchants ventured from Greece to settle in southern Gaul to establish commercial interests there, as traders do. Within the span of 50 years, southern Gaul, no small slice of land, had been Christianized and accepted the faith. This was at a time when Christians were still a persecuted religious sect in various parts of the Roman Empire. They had no state backing, they weren't exactly missionaries, they were businessmen. Yet, through their spirit and living testimony, they had a profound effect on those around them, and eventually their neighbors, customers, and partners began to adopt the faith. It was these Greek merchants, along with individual missionaries, who sowed the seeds of what would later become Christendom in that part of Western Europe. Although the past didn't have the globalistic, dysgenic, and anti-human agenda that it necessarily has today, it wasn't exactly the Shire either. The world then, as now, had no shortage of evil within it. Ancient societies were quite often violently brutal, repressive, and yes, in certain circumstances, degenerate. While the glories of Rome are long remembered, less remembered is its inhumanity. The plant silphium was harvested to extinction, largely because of its properties for inducing abortions, just as one example. The ancient world was also rife with infanticide, with infants routinely being abandoned to die from the elements, notable exceptions to this being the Christians, Jews, and ancient Egyptians. The ancient world was also none too shy about decimating a people once it had conquered an enemy power, should they have gained the upper hand in a conflict, as was the case with the Roman victory over the Carthaginians or the Gallic wars waged by Julius Caesar. It was in such a harsh world that the first Christians, an insignificant sect from Judea, began to make their mark on the world. But they didn't start out as particularly brave nor bold, until arguably a miracle happened. The apostles, who hid in fear after the death of Christ, had the Holy Spirit descend upon them before meeting once more with the resurrected Lord, and thus the age of the church began on earth. Through the missionary work of such great men as St. Paul and St. Peter, Christianity began to spread across the Roman Empire, first in Judea, then across Greece to Antioch, and even beginning to take root in Rome itself. The Christians were persecuted, crucified, and otherwise dispensed with across the empire, with all the apostles dying martyrs' deaths, save for John, who was exiled in his old age on the Isle of Patmos before dying in Ephesus. As little power as we have now, the early Christians had even less. Yet, what the early church lacked in power they compensated for through character, spirit, and the preserving hand of divine providence over the Christian church. Many, many believers would meet their end in this time of persecution at the hands of the Roman state and local Jewish or pagan authorities. Nevertheless, despite the temporal power of these evil forces, they were unable to quench the faith of those who believed the gospel, nor prevent it from changing the lives of the faithful and those who they encountered longing for the truth. Eventually, the Christian faith would overcome the paganism of the Romans, who once persecuted them, and yet the troubles weren't over. While the Eastern Roman Empire persisted as a Christian state in one form or another until 1453, the western half of the empire, inherited by the Christians, was perhaps already in terminal decline by the time of Constantine. Through infighting, structural problems, and its inability to fend off the barbarian invasions, the Western Roman Empire fell in 476. Yet, the faith of the Christians persisted, the wisdom and traditions of the past persisted within the monasteries, who engaged in ministry with the local people, and together they preserved the seeds for a brighter and stronger order in the West, which would rise once again. They couldn't go back and recreate the past and the present, but they could preserve the truth with a capital T and carry it into the future, where it would once again reemerge when the spirits of men were ready. Though not perfectly analogous to our current situation, the Christians of the Roman Empire and those in the wake of its Western collapse were living in extremely trying times. But despite the odds, the disappointment, the danger, they didn't despair. For to despair was to sin and to submit to the evil one and those beneath him. Ultimately, their hope wasn't of this world, and they didn't expect any one man to deliver them from the dangers and persecutions of the age. So must it be with us. As our ancestors before us, it may be our lot to live during the decline of the West. Yet that isn't the end of the story. Should that fate indeed be upon us, we are called to stand as men among the ruins, and seek as we are able to live virtuously and with eternal hope, as the Lord has commanded us. In the end, evil cannot build, only corrupt and destroy. While it can offer temptations and distractions to the weak, it will never satisfy the deepest desires of the hearts of men. Eventually, its promises will be seen as empty. The corruption will consume itself, but sadly destroying much of what was great and good in its wake, it must be admitted. But the darkness cannot hold and conquer forever. Truth and goodness endure eternal, even if they are driven from the public space and shrouded by lies. For we do not wrestle against flesh and blood, but against principalities, against powers, against the rulers of the darkness of this age, against spiritual hosts of wickedness in the heavenly places, as is written in Ephesians 6:12. Against such powers, it may seem a hopeless task to resist or overcome such forces, and by our own strength, perhaps this is true. Yet, should we master our own spirits and bring them in line with the order of providence, that is when the Lord works through men, and great and glorious and righteous deeds can occur. Ultimate victory is in the hands of one greater than any man, and it is only in his plan that trust should be placed. This has been Mr. Patriarch. If you've enjoyed this video, the best thing you can do to help me out is subscribe if you haven't already, like, comment, and share with somebody who you think will benefit from this material. I look forward to seeing you again soon. Patriarch out.